our union with God is not conceptual. We don't think ourselves into a relationship with God. We already are in a relationship with God. That's objective reality. It's just our subjective awareness of that reality is not always there. That's where growth happens.
This is a show about self-discovery,
about understanding ourselves,
about looking into the mirror to see the good,
the bad,
and the unknown of who we are.
This is about how we relate to God
and everyone else.
From Love Thy Neighborhood in Louisville, Kentucky. Welcome to the Enneacast.
Hey, welcome to the Enneacast. I am Jesse Eubanks.
And I'm Sam Stevenson.
Every episode, we walk you through the Enneagram, and we've just concluded all of our type episodes for Season 2, and we're excited because now we're going to kick off a series of topical episodes.
Yeah, that's right. So these next few episodes won't focus on any one number in particular, but rather these episodes will be an overview of a certain topic that affects all of the numbers in various ways.
And Sam and I are excited because the very first one we're going to talk about today is spiritual formation and spiritual disciplines.
That's right. So things like Bible reading, prayer, fasting, meditation, there's a whole range of disciplines or practices that can help us cultivate our spiritual lives.
And joining us today to talk about spiritual formation in the Enneagram is special guest Tom Pussel. Tom is a chaplain and a certified grief recovery specialist. He also leads Deeper Journey Cleveland, a retreat in partnership with our friends at Crosspoint Ministry. He is also a life coach and does Enneagram consulting. And he joins us today from Cleveland, Ohio. Hey, Tom.
Hello.
Good to have you on, man.
It's good to be here.
So, Tom, as Sam was saying a second ago, there are a lot of things that we could talk about under the umbrella of spiritual formation. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to start here. Let's just build a foundation first for our conversation. So our friends at Crosspoint teach that there are 3 primary disciplines, and all the other spiritual disciplines actually find themselves coming out of these containers. Can you tell us a little bit about these 3 foundational disciplines, what they are and why they're important?
Well, as you guys know, when you track with Jim and Rich, they bring you to that foundational discipline of silence and solitude, which I think is the driver for all the others. And that's obviously one of the 3, but just to cultivate that space where you're away from the distraction of people, solitude, and you're away from the distraction of noise, silence, that you can see how you see and encounter God's unconditional love, loving you just as you are, not as you should be. You'll never be as you should be. And just marinating in that tremendous grace that nothing you can do will make God love you more. Nothing you could do will make God love you any less. And that gets mediated through the silence and solitude. And so if we don't have that in our lives, everything just spins from that place of disintegration and noise and monkey mind and, whatever term you want to use from it. So if we cultivate that, then that opens up the scripture reading in a way that scripture unfolds and intersects with our own life so that, whatever's going on in our story comes under that meta-narrative, that story of the kerygma, the life, death, resurrection, ascension of Jesus Christ our Lord. So, and then out of that flows the awareness piece, just self-awareness. How do we see the people around us? How do we see ourselves? And that's what the Enneagram's all about.
Yeah. Tom, can you speak a little bit to just the importance of cultivating disciplines? Like, what's at stake if we don't take time to discipline ourselves spiritually?
Well, then you just get controlled and run ragged by external influences, whether they're good or not so good. You end up not living your life.
Yeah, and we live in an age that's just when you start talking about silence and solitude, mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know if it's the hardest time in human history, but gosh, it sure feels like it might be the hardest time in human history to achieve that because we're more accessible than we've ever been before. And now every time we get margin in our lives, we just fill it with the next thing. instead of, taking that time to slow down. It's a real challenge. I would imagine that practicing and cultivating these disciplines can look different for different Enneagram types because each type has, what's called, we'll call it a downstream discipline and an upstream discipline. Can you talk about what that means and what the difference is between those two things?
Yeah, we're all created in the image and likeness of God. And so that's non-negotiable. That comes with the software. And so every single one of us has dignity and worth. And, the beauty of a Trinitarian view of God is that there's unity and diversity, and the two are married together. And so in God's wonderful unity, there's this incredible diversity of ways of being and doing, people, flowers, food, you name it. So everybody has a uniqueness to their design that reflects that image and likeness of God. And so there's going to be some things that are very natural, given our temperament, given our background, given our gifts, and that's things are just going to flow from that natural space. And there's going to be things that are going to be challenging, and that those areas present the growth edge. And so that's the upstream term that we use when you really feel like you're going upstream against the current. That's where growth happens. We sure grow when we're out of our comfort zone.
Yeah, that's so good. So downstream disciplines are just those that just come more natural. So if we imagine we're in, a little stream of water and it's starting to flow and our bodies naturally are just being taken with the stream. That's going downstream. But if we want to, get somewhere that's upstream, we're going to have to strive and push, and it's going to take some work.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I'd like for us to do. Let's go one by one through the 9 Enneagram types, and then have you just talk about the downstream and upstream practice for each type, and then ways to cultivate spiritual disciplines in our lives. So why don't we start with the Heart Triad, and Sam, why don't you just kick us off?
Yeah, so just a reminder for our listeners, the Heart Triad starts with type 2s, and the type 2s are our lovely helpers. Everybody in the Heart Triad, we know, struggles with shame, and for the 2 that manifests itself, their core sin struggle is the issue of pride. But God invites the 2 into a life of humility. So Tom, talk to us about spiritual disciplines and practices for the life of 2s.
When you look at a 2, you see a very helpful, serving, unselfish, affirming, generous person. And their virtue that they're striving for is humility, but they're dealing with this vice of pride. When they're not healthy, they get real enmeshed, annoying, demanding, complaining, needy. And so when you look at that, their preferred spiritual discipline that's going to come easy is the service and the fellowship, because they're just naturally giving people. They give and they don't collect any stamps. And that's why, a lot of ministry organizations and churches love 2s, because they're so hospitable.
Right, yeah, totally, yeah.
So anything hospitality related, they're all over it, and they're great at it. And that's where they really shine. And so that's going to be the downstream. But to introduce some resistance, which is what we need to grow, the cross wasn't comfortable. The cross was not natural. This is an unnatural experience, and yet each of us has to carry this cross. So if we want to lean into that for the 2, the thing that's going to move them upstream is solitude, just to get away from the needs of others and to try to get in touch with what's really going on in them. Because 2s are so good at sniffing out what other people need. They're not good at finding out what they need. And that's what they need. And that another discipline is self-care, as opposed to being always giving towards another. What do they need for themselves? Sabbath, having a regular Sabbath really prevents them from being burnt out and always helping. Confession is big, especially if they have a good spiritual director, because that spiritual director will be able to see through the pride and call them out on that. And then just secrecy, just to do something without anybody knowing it. 2s can blow their trumpet in terms of, what they do for others. And so to do something on the sly is another great discipline for them.
Oh, that's cool. That sounds like that's a good one. Yeah, even on the solitude thing, I heard somebody point out that for a lot of 2s, it's not enough just to go, I'm going to go sit by myself in a coffee shop. Many 2s, they literally, when it's solitude, it literally means to not be around other human beings. because twos have such a magnetic pull towards the needs of others. They just read the needs of others very easily. So even to sit in a coffee shop, you're scanning the room and you can just see all the need in the room. And so twos need to take that solitude like to its extreme, like go out to a space and a place where you're away from other people.
Yeah. And for a two to allow somebody to do something for them, it's big.
Yeah, and not say like, how can I pay you back? And not even to like send a thank you note or something. Like, just to have total one-way receiving of love and pouring out without feeling like you need to offer or manifest anything back in that direction. That will kill all the twos. To not
I know so many twos are like cringing right now. I'm sure. Well, let's talk about type 3. So type 3, also known as the achiever. And of course, the shame of 3 gives birth to the deadly sin of deceit, and especially that oftentimes becomes self-deceit. And God invites the 3 into a life of honesty. So Tom, talk to us about these folks.
Yeah, with threes, they're so efficient and they have such a need to get things done. That's their gift. But as you already mentioned, they struggle with deceit, and the virtue they need to cultivate is truth. And so when a three's operating out of her comfort zone or his comfort zone, they're going to be into service, celebrating, starting things, witnessing, you name it. I mean, they're just good at that promotion that is so necessary to energize and get people rolling. But the upstream discipline to cultivate the truth factor, which they need, is an examination. What's really motivating me, really? Threes can really get blinded to what they think their image is, but an Ignatian examine, where each day you just take inventory of what's happened, but drilling down into the motivations, like why did I really do this? Once again, confession, facing failure. Threes do not like to face failure, but the gospel is all about failure. You go into silence and solitude, the primary spiritual discipline, and you come out of failure, because if we sit there for 20 minutes, we feel like a failure because it's hard to do, and our mind just goes berserk. And we have to just accept God's love and all that. So spiritual direction is another really good thing for a 3, just to be held accountable and to open themselves to review. Another needed spiritual discipline is secrecy. Again, can they do something that's not going to go on their resume or make them look good or help out in something that they're promoting? And then just slowing down and breathing. 3s run at such a high RPM. They're not really good at slowing things down. So even if that's just a simple breath prayer, it can really help them out. Yeah,
that's really good. Okay, so let's move on to type 4, the second best type on the Enneagram.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, so type 4s are the originalist, also in the heart triad, so they struggle with shame. And for them, shame gives birth to the deadly sin of envy. But God invites the 4 out of envy and into a life of balance and equanimity. So Tom, talk us through the spiritual disciplines for the life of a 4.
Yeah. So 4s are always kind of stuck in this, melancholic, creative angst that they love to be in, and they don't want others to get them because they just love being in that unique kind of space.
You might be right. You might be right.
Yeah. So what's natural for a 4, what they prefer doing is to journal. Let me journal and split open what's going on in my heart and soul and express that. Worship is a preferred discipline for the 4. Meditation. The thing that 4s need to face is just kind of the ordinariness of life, that boring's okay, and there's no need to have something be special or exciting. Service is really good for a 4. Simplicity, not getting occupied with what they have or don't have, and then just hanging with other people without the need to dive into anything deep. Can you just hang out with somebody and just be? Submission. Do you have some checks and balances in your life? Some people that you see as an authority that can really speak truth in your life? And then solitude and silence and centering prayer kind of keeps them on point.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, the submission one is an interesting one. The idea of like having some people in your life that you have to, they hold you accountable. You got to check in with them because, 4s, we have a tendency to kind of want to go I don't know if rogue's the right word, but we just tend to want to do things in our own way. And the idea of, being connected to a community and there being order to that so that we're under somebody else, that's contrary to our nature, but so good for us because God designed us to be part of a bigger community. Well, that is the Heart Triad. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Tom Pussel will be walking us through the spiritual disciplines for both the Head and the Gut Triad. Stay with us. Okay, so the Enneagram is all about introspection, right?
Yeah, it's about self-awareness, doing the inward journey in order to become a more fully formed person and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. But there's some danger in just getting lost in the maze inside of ourselves. We're not intended just to become only introspective people.
Right. It's helpful, but I think that there is a point at which the things you're learning inside need to be applied to the friends and loved ones and the neighbors around you.
Yeah, and I think that as part of that is about serving other people. Mm-hmm. So check this out. This is from Joseph Williams. He's a pharmacist in Charleston, West Virginia, and this is what he had to say about his time serving with Love Thy Neighborhood.
LTN really taught me service. It was just great to see other individuals the same age as me with a heart of service, serving individuals that may be less fortunate than we're used to, and people that grew up differently than we have.
So if you're looking for a place to serve, we would totally encourage you to come check us out. Visit us online at lovethyneighborhood.org.
You can serve with us for a summer or a year. We have so many different internship opportunities that you can choose from. There's going to be one there that's going to be suited just for you. So again, head over to lovethyneighborhood.org and apply today. Okay, so Sam, you grew up in a mostly white culture?
Yeah, that's fair to say.
And then you came to Love Thy Neighborhood, and it's pretty diverse here.
Yeah, our neighborhoods were diverse, the church is diverse, my households, my roommates neither one of them were white. And through the course of doing life together, we recognized that not only do we need to tell our stories through the lens of our faith and our church upbringing, but we also need to tell our story through the lens of race and our ethnic identity and our families.
That actually caused you and one of your roommates, Ashley Jackson, to write a little something about that.
That's true. Yeah. So we created this workbook called Different Together, Exploring Your Racial Identity in Christian Community.
So what you wrote was actually a 5-day workbook where someone would go through and they would chronologically begin to map out their understanding of their own ethnic identity as well as how they probably perceive other ethnic identities.
Yeah, what I really like about this tool and what we found as we were writing it was we were kind of coming at this conversation from two different jumping off points. And so that's why we believe that this tool will be really helpful because it gives a space for people, no matter what their previous upbringing may have been, to really begin to engage these important conversations.
So if you want this tool, Different Together, Exploring Ethnic Identity in Christian Community, just head over to lovethyneighborhood.org/just4you. You'll get this download along with a series of other free gifts. Again, head over to lovethyneighborhood.org/just4you. Hey, welcome back to the Enneacast. I'm Jesse Eubanks.
And I'm Sam Stevenson.
So we are continuing our journey through the triads as we talk through the spiritual disciplines and spiritual formation. We have our special guest, Tom Pussel, with us, and we've now come to the head triad. So let's talk about type 5, the investigator. So for folks in the head triad, their struggle in life is the issue of fear, and fear eventually, for 5s, gives birth to the deadly sin of greed. And God invites them to a life of generosity. So, Tom, what do spiritual disciplines look like for type 5?
Yeah, I mean, the disciplines for 5 are going to be aimed at just getting the 5 into the game in terms of emotional involvement, because 5s tend to detach from their own feelings and they just disengage from other people. So, the invitation is how can I trust people? How can I let people in? And how do I grow against that vice of greed? And so the preferred disciplines for the 5 are going to be retreat and rest. That's going to come natural for a 5. Meditation, study. They love to investigate and study, as you said. And the silence and solitude. Those are the preferred disciplines. That's going to help them along the way. But to introduce the necessary resistance and just to put them in spaces to grow, what they need to do is to serve in a real hands-on way. Down and dirty, get in there and get involved. Giving and sharing, That goes against the whole tendency to hoard and greed. Justice and compassion. Hospitality is another great discipline for a 5, and fasting. And the fasting is not just dietary. A lot of times for a 5, the fasting needs to be information, because they're always just taking in more and more data. How do they just cut back on the data and actually get in the game in terms of engaging with others and in life?
It's funny you should say all of that, because on the first season of the Enneacast, our guest for Type 5 was Mike Cosper, and Mike tweeted that his wife has been saying that she thinks he needs to spend less time on Twitter, and he was reluctant to do that because he loves how much information he can get from Twitter and all the engagement there. And so she did something so down and dirty. She actually got out his own book that he wrote and began reading passages to him because of that, that desire to engage. It's just good. It's good to engage relationally with the folks around you.
Okay, so that was the 5. So let's move on to type 6. So type 6 are a lovely loyalist. And for this type, they are in the head triad. So we know that they struggle with fear. And for the 6, fear gives birth to the deadly sin of more fear. So the virtue that 6s need to live into is that of courage. So Tom, how can 6s cultivate spiritual discipline, specifically with that virtue for transformation of courage?
Yeah, the disciplines are going to be looking at how do they see how much energy goes into the fear factor, because that's always online. So for a 6, what's normal for them, what's natural, is to submit. They're always looking for an external authority. Hey, can you tell me what to do in the situation? Examination, they're very good at. They're very sharp in terms of knowing what's going on inside, and Bible reading. So that stuff comes natural, but to introduce the disciplines to get them to grow, they really need to take acts of faith where they step out and they don't have it figured out, because they're going to run straight into the fear factor and have to deal with it. Worship is another great discipline, something that prompts them to just express what's going on inside in their love for God. And celebrate. 6s can be really duty bound and don't take time to celebrate or have any fun. And then fellowship with other people. So that helps them move towards something that's a little healthier. But the big thing is the acts of faith. When they can step into something unknown and own it, that's where they're really going to grow.
Yeah, that's good, because that's literally an act of courage,
Yep.
to step out into something and it's unknown. I'm also thinking too about what you said about worship, because my wife is a 6, and I noticed that when she worships, there's like this integration that happens between her head and her heart and her body. There's something that really kind of fuses together when she's worshiping, that there are not necessarily, it doesn't always happen in other spaces of life, but worship is a fairly reliable space, where it fuses those 3 elements together for her.
Yeah, and for the 6 to engage in worship, they have to turn off that doubting, questioning mindset that's always there, and they just have to go with it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, and last in the head triad, we've got type 7, the enthusiast. For these folks, fear gives birth to the deadly sin of gluttony. God invites the 7 into a life of sober-mindedness. So what does it look like for 7s to cultivate spiritual formation?
Anything that gets them to see how easily they're distracted from facing pain, because they get so scattered trying to do all kinds of things that are generally fun, that they just avoid pain, responsibilities, and routines. So what's going to come natural to the 7 is fun. They just love it. That comes natural for them. So the worship, the fellowship, the projects, things like that, they enjoy that. But what they need to grow is serving, especially in a way that you're dealing with people who are disadvantaged. So that could be in a challenging ministry context where there isn't a fun payout. I think the 7 just needs to pay attention, like, where's that payout of fun and energy? And are they serving in a way where that's not there? And they're really going to grow. Study, memorizing stuff, not fun, but it can really help them out. Silence and solitude will slow them down. Fasting, and for the 5, the fasting might be data information. For the 7, it's probably going to be cutting down on all the fun foods or drinks or whatever, whatever they like to get into. And then also submission. is another key thing for a 7.
Yeah, I think about, Sam, you remember in season 1, Jonah Sage came on and he was in the midst of making a 1-year commitment to not start any new projects.
Yeah.
And he talked about how hard that was at first, but that it's been such a good thing for him.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the gut triad. So start off with 8s. 8s, as we know, are the powerful person. Everybody in the gut triad struggles with guilt, and for the 8, that guilt gives birth to the deadly sin of shamelessness. But God invites the 8 out of shamelessness and into a life of mercy. So Tom, tell us about the 8.
Yeah, the awareness piece for the 8 is, how does my energy as an 8 impact others in good ways and in not so good ways? Because 8s can be really loud in a lot of different ways, and they're shameless in that. And so the 8s usually don't like anything that's weak in themselves and in others, but they love to champion the underdog. So the thing that's going to come natural for the 8 is going to be service. 8s are powerful types, and they can get it done, and they like to serve. Justice and truth-telling, that comes natural for the 8. So all that stuff's going to flow out of their natural gifting. The area that they could grow in and that they need to find in terms of the spiritual disciplines is confession, being honest about how they're just steamrolling people, detachment from what they think should happen or how it should happen. Spiritual direction is really good, because the spiritual director is going to be able to see through kind of that powerful front and dig around. Submission, huge for an 8, because that does not come naturally. And then silence and solitude. 8s are in the gut triad, and so they're really in tune with their bodies, and the silence and solitude can bring them into a deeper level of attunement. What's going on there?
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. Well, let's talk about 9s. Both you guys are 9s. Both you and Sam are both 9s. So for 9s, their guilt gives birth to the deadly sin of sloth or laziness. And God's invitation for the 9 is a life of exertion. How does this play out in spiritual disciplines?
What? What'd you say?
Classic. We bored Tom.
I don't know. What do you think? What do you want to do? Yeah, so I'm a 9. That's why I can say those things. So 9s just have to pay attention to how much of their emotional, mental bandwidth is just getting pulled into other people's agendas, and where am I allowing other people to make claims on my life? Because 9s just have an uncanny way of slipping into the skin of others, and it happens real subtly, and they do it, and they become passive dependent. So the things that 9s do well in terms of spiritual disciplines is the silence and solitude. Like that, silence and solitude is so easy for a 9. A 9 can slip right into that. Meditation, prayer, all that comes really easily. But what the 9 needs to incorporate is some truth-telling, primarily to themselves, and then actually to voice it to other people, which means inviting conflict. And that's what 9s are desperately trying to avoid, because they want to keep the peace. And so when I work with 9s, including myself, I have to say, where am I sacrificing self for the sake of peace? And that's where I'm in trouble. And then moving forward is, where am I willing to sacrifice peace for the sake of self? Because I'm so desperately avoiding sacrificing that peace that I'm disowning myself. And that is no bueno for anyone. So truth-telling is huge. And then justice, anything that involves a confrontation. And when you do social justice or any kind of prophetic ministry, you're naming the captivity, you're showing up, you're in a very confrontational way, in a good way. And then serving, but not serving in the sense of being in the background, like taking the lead in something. A 9 needs to take the lead, because that's going to be uncomfortable, and that's where they're going to grow.
Yeah, I do really resonate with the notion that like silence and solitude come really easily. I was reading about other Enneagram books, and it talked about like being in nature is really healthy for a 9, because we can see the interconnectedness of creation and just be centered and have kind of the external dictate our internal world a little bit. So yeah, I think that's super important. But then I also see how the component of justice in particular is really important for the 9, because nines can kind of live in that gray space where they can understand both sides. So the notion that nines should take a stand on one side, and even if it means being against something else, I think that for them to find conviction and to find truth to stand up for, and like you're saying, that truth telling to help kind of counteract that tendency to merge. So yeah, just keeping a mindset of justice, I can imagine, and I've seen it in my own personal life, be really healthy and helpful, even though it feels terrifying, in the first beginning stages. Let's move on to the last one, the ones, best for last, the reformers or the perfectionist. And like the rest of us in the Gut Triad, ones deal with the issue of guilt, but for them, it leads to the deadly sin of anger. And God invites them out of a life of anger and into a life of patience. So Tom, how can the one cultivate more patience?
Yeah, the one is just paying attention to all the shoulds and oughts. They just need to stop shoulding on themselves because they just are always should. I should do this. I should do that.
It's such a good phrase.
And how are they, judging themselves and others? Because it's always going on and it does not stop. And ones are so frustrated with that. They're like, I don't know how to not do that. And that's just, it's part of the deal. So what comes natural for the one is going to be that justice piece. Stewardship is going to come natural because that's the right thing to do, and discipling people because they know they've got pretty good boundaries and categories as far as discipleship is concerned. Where the disciplines that can help them a lot, though, that's going to move them upstream in a way that gives them the resistance needed for growth, is the silence and solitude piece and rest. Just rest and retreat. The one is always reforming, always fixing. What does it mean to just not fix, not reform? The funny thing about it is change rarely happens when we're trying to change. Change happens when we're not. When you show up with no demands and no expectations, that's when the change happens. And the ones are always trying to change and fix. Service, but service in a way that puts them in a role where they have to submit to somebody else's idea of what's right, and they can't take the driver's seat on the bus. And anything that plops them into a ministry where they've got to engage with others in a way that necessitates grace. They are in a situation that is not moral and that is not perfect. How can they show up in that space and give that grace? That's going to be really good for them. And then it shows up in almost every type, but spiritual direction, because ones think they're right. And when you do spiritual direction, you realize how often you're not. So that's the one.
That's really, really good and really helpful. So let me just ask this final question. What's the point of doing all of these things? Like for us as Christians, what is all of this hopefully leading toward?
An experiential connection with the divine. Our union with God is not conceptual, okay? I'm not at all discounting reason, but we don't think ourselves into a relationship with God. We already are in a relationship with God. That's objective reality. It's just our subjective awareness of that reality is not always there. And so how do we enter into a greater subjective awareness of that objective union that we have with God through Christ? It's going to happen, through the day in, day out life and the situations we're willing to enter into and put ourselves into, and the practices that we do so that we can show up. And so I think it's a long-winded way of saying we're after that experiential connection with the divine that comes through our intentionality to show up and to do what doesn't always feel good.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. Well, this has been great, and I'm really glad that we've been able to explore this. Well, listen, when we come back, we will be playing Cast Your Vote with Tom Pussel. Stay with us. Okay, so I know there's people probably that would love to come to our Enneagram workshops, but they just can't travel.
Yeah, we are far away for a lot of people.
Yeah. So what we're thankful for is our friend Beth McCord at Your Enneagram Coach has offered a little bit of a solution for that.
Really?
Yeah. So folks that are on our mailing list, as well as folks that have given us reviews on iTunes, they're eligible to win a free online Enneagram course from yourenneagramcoach.com.
So, like, hypothetically, if I knew somebody that co-hosted a podcast and they just wanted to brush up on their Enneagram knowledge, would someone such as that person be eligible to participate in said course?
That was some impressive maneuvering there.
Hypothetical scenario. I have several friends.
Well, hypothetically, that's not an option.
Oh, darn.
Okay, so if you would like to win a free online course from yourenneagramcoach.com, all you have to do is head over to lovethyneighborhood.org/Enneacast. But also, if you head over to iTunes and you leave a review for the Enneacast or for the Love Thy Neighborhood podcast, or for both, you'll be entered for up to 2 additional chances to win. So that's up to 3 chances to win this online Enneagram course.
So say someone hypothetically hosted a podcast and they hypothetically left a review for the podcast that they host, would they then be qualified to win this contest?
Hypothetically, still no.
Okay, darn.
In today's episode of the Enneacast, we're talking about spiritual disciplines, and we're exploring how each type can pursue their faith in ways that's going to help them grow. But one of the dangerous things that we can also tend to do at times is downplay things by over-spiritualizing them, or spiritualizing them in ways that are inaccurate. Well, if you'd like to explore that a little bit more, head over to our other podcast, the Love Thy Neighborhood podcast, and specifically check out episode number 7, where the gospel meets mental illness.
I started becoming delusional.
I had immoralized it. I had spiritualized it.
It's a scary thing to see someone that you love, you care about, in a full mania state.
You know, I didn't want there to be something wrong with me.
I was really trusting God and crying out to God, and there was no relief.
So subscribe now wherever it is that you listen to podcasts, or you can check us out on Spotify. Just look up Love Thy Neighborhood, or head over to lovethyneighborhood.org/LTN podcast. Hey, welcome back to the Enneacast. I'm Jesse Eubanks.
And I'm Sam Stevenson.
And now it's time for Cast Your Vote. Okay, our game today is called Cast Your Vote. Here's how it works. Tom, we're going to read you a card, and you're going to vote for which Enneagram type you think is best described by that card. For example, who made the most money selling lemonade as a child? So you might vote for type 3. You're going to keep your vote to yourself, and Sam and I are also going to vote and try to match your vote. So we'll actually say our answers first, and then you'll reveal your answer last.
Okay.
If we match, we get a point. Are you ready to play?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Topic number 1. Who would survive the longest in a zombie apocalypse? Who would survive the longest in a zombie apocalypse? Okay, Sam, your vote?
My gut said 6.
My gut also said 6.
But
Tom?
9.
9?
Really?
Yeah, because they'll sit so still. So quiet that either the zombie will not notice them as alive or recognize them as one of their own.
Oh, man. I just have a new strategy in case the zombie apocalypse happens in my lifetime.
Shout out to the sleepwalkers.
Hey.
Yeah, 6s I thought had the most stowaway preparation. Like, they were already kind of, I feel like the 6s in the world are maybe already preparing for a zombie apocalypse. So I was thinking like, oh, this is the moment for which I've been created. And they like just have all of the like arsenal of canned goods. And I don't know what you might need to survive a zombie apocalypse, but I felt like the 6s were going to be the most prepared. But 9s put a good argument because we would just like lay low and maybe hang out in like the forest or something and nobody would find us. So that's funny.
Okay, I got another question for you. Here we go. Who would be the most upset if all their possessions were lost in a fire? Who would be the most upset if all their possessions were lost in a fire?
I'm going to rely on my mind meld with a fellow 9 on this one.
All right, well, let's see what you got, mind melder.
I think a 2 would be the most upset because not only are their resources compromised, but that also might include some relational compromise as well. So they now have to look outward for help. and that's like really, really hard for her to. So I think the consequences and the next steps in this scenario of the two having to rebuild their lives would be really challenging for them.
Okay, so I'm not thinking 2, but some of my reasoning is actually the same. I'm going to say 5, and it's for similar reasons. I think that 5s really struggle with like wastefulness. Like they don't want things to be wasteful. They don't want to lose things. They definitely don't want to have to spend a bunch of money, that they've already bought it once before. And to be in a situation where all the eyes of, the neighborhood are on them, because their house burned down, and everybody's coming over going, let us help you, let us help you, let us help you. And the 5's independence, is being rubbed against relentlessly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the loss of possessions plus the ever presence of a giant community of people might be a little challenging for the 5.
That's true. Okay, Tom, what's your answer?
I'm going to say 4.
Ah,
why?
Because everything's unique. Everything's one of a kind. Like
that's my special thing. It can never be replaced. Oh yeah, it's my special thing that it got destroyed. So many special things.
So many special things. So many, and let alone and it's all irreplaceable. And then let alone the experience of the Inferno.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, so, at least it was a unique, a special experience.
Exactly.
They would their memoir would be like, "When my life burned down."
Yeah, right, right.
Beauty from ashes.
But see, this is great for like creative expression of the experience,
no doubt,
artwork and everything.
Dang it!
Yeah.
The last round, Tom. Whose life would you like to live?
So if he had to pick any other type,
basically,
if he had to pick another type or your own, you could choose to remain yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Or you could switch types. And we're gonna take a guess here.
Okay.
I think I have mine.
Okay, go ahead, Sam.
I think that Tom would want to live more like a 7.
And why is that?
Based on Tom's, professional and personal life of just doing a lot of heavy, like entering into heavy, dark spaces with people as a chaplain and pastor. I feel like he might long to have a life of more spontaneity and adventure and fun. So that's 7.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, I was going to say 2 because I think Tom already enjoys helping other people, but I think that even being able to kind of engage that space more might be appealing. But I honestly think he would choose to stay a 9. I think that Tom has come to terms with who he is, and he's ready to take it home.
He's pretty content.
He has chosen the horse he's going to ride in the Derby. Like this is the way that it is.
A very slow horse.
He's chosen the horse that he's going to mosey through the Derby.
Yes.
Okay, Tom, what's the answer? Moment of truth.
It's a trick question. So the answer is 9 because as 9s, we always live everybody else's life except our own. And so we want to live our own life. We want to be comfortable in our own skin and not just, hey, what do you want to do? So that's the little spin I'm putting on it. But I do like the 7, and I do need some more gluttony in my life for sure. So
awesome. All right. Well, this has been Cast Your Vote. Sam,
I didn't get any.
You didn't get any points, and I got 1.
So Tom, you're the winner.
So Tom, you're the winner.
Us.
There you go.
Okay. So now it's time for listener questions.
So this question comes from Nate Allen. He asks, how does knowing your Enneagram number benefit spiritual growth in a practical way?
And you're asking me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you're the expert.
I'm still thinking about the zombie apocalypse. So yeah, I guess the analogy would be just how does a good pair of glasses benefit you? We have to see how we see. And so if we rewind the tape back to just personality, it's how we see, and then what we're doing with the data that we see, and then how we present ourselves. And that all flows back to how do we see? And so to see that primary type, that dominant type, is going to open up an awareness of how we see things. And, that's where all the change happens, is in awareness. It's all awareness, awareness, awareness. And so anything that we can do to cultivate that awareness is going to pay huge dividends. Relationally, spiritually, it all goes together. So it opens the awareness piece.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, this next question comes from wilderness_L. How can I use the Enneagram as a tool to grow across the spectrum, not just as my number or toward my growth arrow? So I think what they're asking is just, how can I use the Enneagram to try to grow more holistically and not just fixate on my specific type?
Yeah. Going back to the first question, when we see how we process, when we see how we present ourselves, it introduces humility to us. And so we can use the tool as a way of cultivating humility that, you know what, we don't have the full picture. And when we go through life with a sense of mystery, awe, and wonder, and not knowing, that opens up all kinds of things. If we're going through life thinking that we know our type, somebody else's type, or that we've got the full picture, it just shuts everything down. The journey is a journey of faith, which means we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't really know ourselves, and nor do I really know you. And so the tool gives us that level of humility. And so that's how I would approach that question that the person was asking, is that it's not just your type, it's about a greater appreciation for all the types and all the people that are in your life and that you will meet, and to know that you don't know. And so you give them the benefit of the doubt, and you're open to other things out of your comfort zone.
That's good. Yeah, one of the things, too, that we talk about is just the fact that while we, for reductionistic purposes, will say, I am a 4 or I am a 9, in truth, we all have elements of all nine types. All of those things are at play within us. And so the goal is really to grow to a place where we appreciate all of the resourcefulness of all 9 types and begin to cultivate these disciplines to move towards all 9 of these things, not just one thing. But that's a heavy load to bear. And so we focus on small pieces one at a time because it's just too much for us as people to take all of it on. But ultimately, the goal is for us to move towards, all 9 of these things.
This just, I feel like, illuminates the importance of taking a test that illuminates your scores on all 9 numbers. A lot of tests that are free may just reveal like, oh, you're this number. Or if you've just read the material, the test that we use and the test that Crosspoint uses really does kind of shed light on here, kind of the different levels of all my numbers. And I think that it's important, when we do our workshop, we say like, pay attention to your highest numbers in the resourceful categories and non-resourceful, but also pay attention to the numbers that are really low and begin to ask questions about that specific gift and why that may not be present, and what about that gift is maybe reminding you of something in your story that's, you're diminishing that gift. So if you have low 3 or low 8 or, low 9, like those all kind of mean different things, and pay attention to that and begin to ask questions, because that'll show you, just the areas that you can grow and allow you to see like, maybe I do have that gift in me all along. So another listener asked a question I think it's important when we talk about spiritual disciplines, and it's kind of getting into what I would define as maybe spiritual warfare. So how might each type influence which spiritual messages we take in and live by for the worse? So they give the example that doctrine of original sin and eternal torment in hell was always just really painful for them as a 9 to kind of come to grips with. So how might spirituality and as it relates to our Enneagram type, the messages that we receive, how would our Enneagram type maybe influence us for the worse?
Yeah, we tend to hear and see what we want to hear and see. We're so biased towards what comes naturally to us. Yeah, so we gravitate towards our groove, which isn't always wrong. It's just not always right. And it's that piece that we don't have the full picture, and we take in what we want to take in. And I have to be aware of my bias. I think we see that everywhere in the news. I mean, people have a terrible lack of ability to be self-critical. I mean, just look at our political system. No one is able to be self-critical. And so the Enneagram hopefully gives us a self-critical tool so that we can see, how we hear and take in things. And so that's the danger in it, is that we're just going to gravitate towards the easy stuff.
Yeah, I heard it said this way, that God in his kindness is fully knowable. Like he makes himself fully knowable and accessible through the life of Christ. But because of his infinite nature, he can never be fully known. And I think that tension is hard because we are finite creatures and we want to have, infinite understanding. but we have to live within our limitations. And so the Enneagram illuminates, I think, which giftedness and which character and aspect of God that we recognize as the easiest. But because of the complexities of his nature, we cannot access and attain and understand all of who he is, and not in a secretive way, but in a way that makes him God and makes us human.
Yeah, and you can't overlook either, even like the way that even our culture influences our Enneagram type. So to be a 9, in the Western world will look different than to be a 9 in another part of the world. So, and I say that for this because the listener gave this example that the doctrine of hell was always very, very difficult for them as a 9. And no doubt that is a very difficult doctrine. I've wrestled with it significantly myself. However, those that have lived in other parts of the world where they have been victims of terrible, terrible injustice, and they've seen, family members, had terrible things done to them, and they've had their lives destroyed. The doctrine of hell doesn't seem so bad. The idea that God will perfectly judge all of humanity. But for a Westerner who is a 9 that feels more comfortable in gray space, something like the doctrine of hell is going to be very painful and very difficult. So I think that we also, to Tom's point, we have to recognize I come with bias and I don't see the whole picture. Hey, well, Tom, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, really appreciate you sharing with us, and we really appreciate just you bringing your insight and walking us through the types. My hope is that this is going to be helpful to a lot of folks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom.
You got it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you to our guest today, Tom Pussel. If you'd like to take part in a retreat with Tom, or if you'd like to receive life coaching or an Enneagram consultation, head over to crosspointministry.com. Just look up Tom under the Our Partners section where you can contact him directly. If you ever get the chance to sit down with Tom, you will benefit greatly. Tom and I were a part of a Deeper Journey retreat together a few years ago, and I always deeply appreciated the things that Tom shared. So again, head over to crosspointministry.com and look under the section called Our Partners, and you can contact Tom there. Also, our game today was based off a real game called The Voting Game, which you can find at Amazon or by going to thevotinggame.com.
Our show is a production of Love Thy Neighborhood. Love Thy Neighborhood is a place where we provide social action internships supported by a Christian community for young adults ages 18 to 30. Come and serve with us for a summer or a year. Grow in your faith and life skills. Learn more at lovethyneighborhood.org.
Today's episode was produced by myself, Sam Stevenson, and Rachel Zabo. Engineering and editing by Rachel Zabo. Music for today's episode comes from Murphy DX.
I'm Sam Stevenson.
And I'm Jesse Eubanks. Remember, the eye can see everything but itself. Find people to journey with you because you were created for community.